caveat that we don't currently purchase any real estate anyway, but we do acquire easements, and sometimes schedules dictate that those easements need to be done quickly.
I don't think easements is what we're talking about.
Well, I think easements does.
Well, I'm
cover
just
that.
addressing that we don't actually purchase any land currently,
Okay.
and we never have.
Well, and purchase of property has always been something that had to come to council.
Well, I think one of the concerns that Brian met during his presentation, though, was the fact that because we didn't operate, cooperate, actually, in the purchase of some easements, it may have not have been the best planning move because it left us in a situation where the city's going to have to come back behind the electric easement and maybe add more with road expansions. Is that correct, Brian?
That's correct.
So if we went into advisory role, do you think you could still operate in a way that was efficient from the EUB standpoint, but the city would make sure that our individuals, Brian and his team, are involved and make sure the plan fits both needs?
But isn't the common thread, sorry to interrupt you, Heath, or Councilman Freeman, isn't the common thread still communication?
No, absolutely. I think
Despite
communications,
the
it fixes a lot of these,
capacity
but
of- yeah.
I think we all have also found out that communication may only be as strong as the backbone of it, and this is what's going to serve as the backbone.
Fair enough, I just,
I mean, the next one is extension of services. Is that something that can be done in an advisory role, or is that something that you feel the EUB has to be able to make that decision on its own?
It's going to come back to the common thread. Those decisions currently are done in a vacuum. The EUB does them because we don't have that communication.
Right.
If you had the ex officio city council member or city admin was involved, we had her at the meeting or something else, we would know better in concert what is going on with the city. Those type of things could be handled a little better, potentially. Right now, though, this is kind of one of those questions where it depends on the extension of service.
Right.
For instance, we extended service east of town to where there's a potential was going to be the low site, right? Some people thought that was unreasonable. Well, first, we conserve that load, and if we're there first, we don't have to fight KCPL later. Second, we did it to provide redundancy to Midwest Commerce. They only had a single line going out to Coleman. Now they have a redundant line to protect them in case there's a problem with electric service. So that goes back to our service agenda and our mission. It depends on what your extension is.
Let's look at those two examples. Let's say that example would have been under an advisory role, and you put together all the fact-finding that you've done within your meetings and came to the table of the council to ask for approval. Saying, we've already done all the homework, this is why we want to do this is why we think it's the best solution, and the board recommendation that we always see in our agendas here, would you still be able to do that efficiently, you believe, if that last step was part of it? Understanding that in almost every case, Chris has mentioned it, when the work has been done and the work is sound and is in the direction the city's appearing to want to go, that in most cases those are approved, maybe with further discussion or maybe some other ideas that maybe need to be sent back for consideration.
The biggest caveat to any decision that would be coming from any type of utility, advisory board or independent board, is that there's a dollar associated with every decision. Planning Commission has some dollar,
Right.
depending on the issue, but, and Tori can probably speak to this better, Planning Commission gets a lot of requests for, does this fit some criteria, what do I have to do to make this work, do we fit, does this fit the master plan, so on and so forth, right? And they get an answer almost black or white.
Right.
Each of these are going to have a dollar associated with it that now you have to consider in your master budget
Sure.
if it's not in this individual budget. So if it's advisory only, you're assuming that there's not a budget separate for electric or BPU, which then means when that decision comes up to you, you've got to look at, well, are we not going to do something else?
Can I just address that? When we were at that meeting on Thursday night, Bill brought up the example I've heard many times that the transformer was leaking oil that services the price chopper.
Right.
And he was acting as a manager of that department, I think a contract manager at that time, and he went to Stuart Fairburn, the city administrator, and said, we've got to have a backup transformer because it could shut down an entire business if it blows, or I guess that's what happens. And he went to Stuart and said, I need you to, to authorize this. And he said, I don't have that ability. And so basically, he had to go to the city council, and the city council, I mean, the happy ending to that story is the city council did exactly what Bill recommended. It's just that it went through the same steps that all the other major purchases go through, which is, and that's why we're here, is to scrutinize every expenditure and to drill down to that granular level that you said you didn't want us to go to this evening. But that's our job. And I guess I'd also go back to Jeff and say, Jeff, when you had a committee that helped you, did you present their findings, or did they present them in Parks and Rec?
I guess it was a little bit of both.
But I mean, ultimately, they were making recommendations to you, and you came before council and said, so in that capacity, were they acting as an independent board or an advisory group?
Mostly as an advisory group.
Okay, and that's all we're suggesting here, is that you can provide the guidance if you want. Personally, I'd rather have the straight information from Bill and not have it, filtered. Not saying that you would deliberately not give us the full information, but it just doesn't make any sense from a logical standpoint to have a third party involved in that. But if that's what you want to do and you want to be involved in that capacity, that's why I said we don't have to totally dissolve the board. We just have to make the council accountable for the actions that they recommend. And we went through this exercise a couple weeks ago, and everyone came to the conclusion that you can't legally make a budget that is not agreeable to this council. We came to the conclusion that...
All you can do is recommend.
Yeah, you can
but-
recommend it, as any division or department would do. We came to the conclusion that you can't have separate pay policies when the overriding, policy comes from the policy manual, which has been adopted by an ordinance, as well as a salary ordinance, which has been adopted as an ordinance. So we decided, even though you can make inputs to that, you can't do that on your own. That was the second thing. And then the third thing is what we discussed after the meeting, Mark, and that is economic development. You said you didn't even want to have economic development.
Correct.
So, I mean, right off the bat, I guess I don't see anything different than what we came up with several weeks ago, and the document, as it was written, was agreeable to everybody. It may have not been what you wanted to hear, but it was practically speaking what you're empowered to do.
If I can draw a comparison, it sounds like that's more parents, children, and we're looking more for a marriage. Because I assume that your wife doesn't run to you every day to get every little decision decided. She knows when to pick up the kids and can do it herself. Well, we're kind of looking for the same thing, because electric or any utility has a lot of decisions that ultimately only should rest on that utility's existence and ability to cover that fee or service or value. It shouldn't be dependent on whether or not the budget of the rest of the city is going to impact the service of that utility. The utility should cover itself with fees. So let that group that does what it does very well sit over here and continue that cycle. There can be certain aspects that have to be handled. For instance, salary schedule could be handled. Economic development, yours, right? Those things aren't an issue. Fixing the legal issue, home rule, here we are. It seems simple.
Go ahead, Christie.
Mark, what type of day-to-day operations things do you think this particular ordinance prevents you from doing?
Day to day,
Yeah, I mean, you said that the big thing is that you felt that EUB needs to be able to kind of manage and make decisions day-to-day. So what types of things do you think are limited by this ordinance in that?
the implementation of the day-to-day. So day-to-day operations will continue even if we are advisory, because we have an electric director who
Right.
does a great job.
Right.
But he has guidance as to where to go for this coming year based off certain numbers that are coming from a budget that's put together by that board. It comes back to the dollars, because for instance, we're studying rates